want to welcome you to the final panel of the day. I think it's been a terrific day and a half in talking about how we can reform the criminal justice system. And we wanted to end the symposium by talking about how things actually happen in the real world. I think, it's very easy to conceive of reform and to opine about and theorize about reform. And in fact, one could argue that legal scholars are probably the worst at this. When legal scholars want to add value, we think about something and we write it down and poof, we're done. Value added, right? And so what we've done today is we've assembled leaders of agencies or leaders of entities here in Philadelphia's criminal justice system who are faced with the hard work of actually implementing the things that we try to devise. And I think particularly in a reform setting, it's very easy, I think given the state of criminal justice in the United States today, given the state of mass incarceration, given the existence of racial disparities, given the socioeconomic divisions and the hard lines that we've drawn between ourselves in a society, it's easy to forget that what we're really about as a criminal justice system is the reduction of crime. And in fact, one of the challenges is that crime persists. And crime persists in our cities, violence persists in our cities, and for all the talk of criminal justice reform, I think it's important to realize that there's two things that we have to do to deal with criminal justice reform. We have to sort of when we talk about the system and the system's approach, what that means to the Quattrone Center is, if the criminal justice system is working as designed, it should be that when a crime occurs, we get the right guy in the right way, and then we do something useful with that person to reduce crime. Not necessarily useful to punish that person, although that may be useful to reduce crime, but that the overarching goal should be make sure that we get it right on guilt and innocence, make sure that we respect everybody's constitutional freedoms, and then once we've done those first two things, do something useful to reduce crime. And that, from my perspective, and I think for the perspective of the people on the panel, don't want me to speak for you, but I hope that that's what we want to do with our system. Get the right guy in the right way and do something useful with that person. And so when we talk about criminal justice reform, a lot of times we really only talk about the incarcerated population, and that's a huge part of American society, but that doesn't change the responsibility that people in our city have to also make sure that we are protecting victims of crime and that we are preventing crime, and that requires sometimes punitive measures and aggressive measures. And so it's that balance and the implementation of our proposed reforms in the real world that we're going to talk about today. In this morning's panel, or speech by Christopher Stone, one of the things that came up was the need for each part of the system to work with other parts of the system to get things done, that no one part of the system is effective as a silo. And that can be made challenging, too, by the fact that we've constructed an adversarial system in the criminal justice system. We believe sometimes that pitting people against each other philosophically is useful to get at the search for the truth. And so that can be a challenge as well, is that while people are trying to work together as a system, in individual cases, we are pitted against one another. And sometimes it's easy to forget that while the system is adversarial, we don't want our participants in the system to be adversarial, right? It's a job, not a personal vendetta, and that can be clouded by the work we do every day as well. We have a rare opportunity here in Philadelphia, I think with the public having spoken and having elected a DA under a banner of reform. We also have civic leaders like Councilman Jones, who I'll introduce in a moment, who have created commissions to look at criminal justice reform. We've talked a lot over the past couple of days about the need for data, how we access that data, what we do with that data. And all of that then comes down to the people that I have here on this table to actually implement the reforms that we've dreamed up. And so it's with great pleasure and honor that I'm going to introduce each of them to you. And then we're going to do basically a Q&A that I hope will become a four-way discussion, 5 ways when we include the audience. There are index cards on each of your tables. I'm going to start with a couple of questions for the panel. You guys should feel free to ask each other questions and take it wherever you'd like to do. And as you guys think of questions, write them down. We'll have people coming around and they'll bring them up to me, and we'll go that way moving forward. So with that, let me introduce our contestants. I'm going to start on my left, but then I'm going to go right to left. So starting with Keir Bradford-Grey, the Chief Defender of the Defender Association of Philadelphia. Ms. Bradford-Grey has been in that role since 2015, but she has a lengthy career in both federal and local public defense, dating back actually to the last century.
That sounds...
Doesn't that sound impressive? Doesn't that sound impressive? She's well known, however, for collaborating across the aisle for individual sentences and alternative sentences. And in fact, I got to know her when she was the public defender in Montgomery County, and what particularly impressed me was what a unique and constructive relationship she had with the DA in Montgomery County at the time, which has then something she's been able to continue in Philadelphia. She's created the Back on Track program in a partnership with the Big Brother, Big Sister program that matches juveniles that have been ensnared in the criminal justice system with mentors. She's created an expungement clinic in partnership with Villanova Law and has restructured the juvenile unit of the public defender's offices to make sure that it can recognize and respond to unmet needs in a child's life and help keep them out of the criminal justice system. To her left is the Honorable Curtis Jones, Jr., City Councilman from the 4th District in Philadelphia, which covers Northwest Philly and parts of West Philly. He's the chair of the Public Safety, Commerce, and Economic Development Committees, vice chair on Parks and Rec and Cultural Affairs, and he and Ms. Bradford-Grey co-chair the Special Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. Full disclosure, I'm also a member on that committee. So it's great. To their left is Police Commissioner Richard Ross. Commissioner Ross is the commissioner of the 4th largest police department in the country, overseeing 6,100 sworn officers and 800 civilian officers. Commissioner, before you took office, we had Captain Healy here at our very first symposium to talk about the implementation of eyewitness reform, and he looked everybody in the audience in the eye and he said, "Thanks for helping us devise our protocols on eyewitness reform. You guys did the easy part." He said, if anybody wants to come take a crack at educating 6,100 sworn and 800 civilian officers on how to do one thing the same way, I welcome you. Commissioner Ross has 28 years of expertise with the police department, serving in every role from patrol through special ops, the Detectives Bureau, homicide, internal affairs, and then serving as the first deputy commissioner under Commissioner Ramsey, where he led the department's reform and accountability initiatives. He's implemented community policing and partnerships, and also has been one of his focuses has been the deployment of technology and data for smart, effective, and respectful policing. And I actually took that quote directly from the police commissioner's website, and I think that word respectful is a really important addition to it, and I note the thoughtfulness with which that word was included in there. And last, but certainly not least, last alphabetically, Judge Carolyn Temin, the first assistant district attorney for the city of Philadelphia. Judge Temin has served in a variety of roles in the criminal justice system. She was actually the first female public defender in the city of Philadelphia. Wow. So as the mother of a 17-year-old girl, thank you for breaking those glass ceilings.
Thank you, too.
She was a homicide prosecutor for 10 years and a judge on the Court of Common Pleas for 20 years. She's also served as an international judge on the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina in Sarajevo, where she looked at organizational crime, corruption, and war crimes. Of course, she's a Penn Law grad. So there was a softball question that we decided to start with, and I'm going to start with the Chief Defender and move our way down. And the softball question was, I'd like each of you to talk for a few minutes about a criminal justice reform initiative that somebody else on the panel has initiated and why you're a fan.
Okay, I can start. I think that's the new district attorney's office has given me a lot of things to talk about, but I'll talk about one. Recently, we heard of a policy change from the district attorney's office that included understanding the cost of a recommendation of incarceration. And I think that is a really good start to talk about what are we doing and why, and is this necessary, and what is the expense to either the taxpayers or the community. I do hope that we evolve from just the economic costs to looking at the human costs as well. That is something that our office is always looking at in terms of, are we making people more desperate with our policies and practices, and what is the community expense of that? I know there are a lot of considerations to be made, but I think starting to really make sense of what we're doing as a way of a practice by making district attorneys understand the economic toll that it takes to recommend a sentence of a few years, I think it puts different perspective into their mindsets in terms of why they're asking for these things. I know that a lot, and often as an insider in that criminal justice system, I see a lot of things being done without thought about the long-term effect. And I think it gets done because we've normalized the way we use our criminal justice system. We've normalized the fact that people go to jail because we have that option. And sometimes we don't really think about the end goal of what we're trying to achieve. And so looking at the destruction that we may have set in place, because sometimes the impact of our system and the penalties are far worse than the original action itself. And so to start understanding that, I think will help us look at what we want to do and how we achieve true public safety by lending ourselves to different practices.
Councilman?
Yes. Good afternoon. You can answer back. Good So I was sitting here thinking how very different the mindset of all of the stakeholders and actors are today. For us to be sitting here in this way with the head law enforcement officer and the head defender, along with city council, and pretty much 90% of the philosophies we agree one another is very different than it was in the past. So this is a hard question for me. I could say that Commissioner ability to do diversion at the 22nd Police District, where officers are given discretion to say, you know what, this is not a bad person, this is a person having a bad day, and what they really need is not arrest, but rehabilitation for drugs. I could claim that as the innovation of this afternoon, but I would have to go with preentry, a concept that this young lady right here put in the lexicon of language in City Council. Preentry means let's get them diverted on the right track before they ever get into the system. And when you said that the first time, I scratched my head in disbelief because it's such a novel concept that why didn't we all just focus on that before? So the specifics of it are that she pointed out, and these individuals testify before our body every year for budget. And after a while, you know, it starts to sound like rah, 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 rah. But the timing of what I'm talking about, criminal justice reform, has everyone's ears perked up. And so we're really listening in City Council to what you have to say. So we went over, I think it was about a half dozen, no, it was 4 of us that went over to your shop, and you gave us a in-depth understanding of everything you do. And other innovations of preentry started popping out, that she could predict in a lot of senses who was going to be a problem for the commissioner as an adult when she had interaction with them as a child. And that if you could have gotten them certain services early on, you would not, it's better to help a child than fix a broken adult concept. And when we dug deeper, not only, and I'll end with this, we have 2 types of elected officials in my body. You have ones that want to hug every inmate in prison because their parents didn't hug them long enough and do this holistic government reform type of, and then I have some colleagues that they don't want to hear about all of the contributing factors. They want to know, how much does it cost? How do we save taxpayers' dollars? And with this criminal justice reform, we actually can accommodate both. That we save money, $130 that we argue about what that figure is a day to incarcerate, versus some early intervention funding to keep people out of the system. So I love what you've done with cameras, and I love what you've done with diversion, but I have to err on the side of the defender.
So one of the things that I would just insert here is, and Councilman, you probably know this better than I do, my recollection is that criminal justice management, including the agencies that we have to do the work from start to finish in the system, is about 42% of the city's overall budget.
I would say maybe 30, it depends on what you count. So it can be as high as what you said, it's more a third. When you think of courts, policing, and prisons, that's at least 1/3 of our budget. And it's a dollar well spent, but it is you can't really save a lot of taxpayers' dollars until you look at those things and try to reduce those costs. So,
and having those dollars available to invest in improvement rather than maintain what we've got, I think is praiseworthy, so I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Commissioner.
So I think for me, it would be a collaborative thing between the Defenders Association, the DA's office, and bail reform. A lot of people may not look at the police department as being advocates for, programs like that, but we recognize that there's no good to come from incarcerating someone because they can't raise $500 or whatever fee, nominal fee, and it really doesn't do anything but clog up the system. And here's a reality that you alluded to, and that is, we still have a city, like many big cities, that has some significant issues, particularly violent crime, which you will hear me speak about rather frequently today. And so while I believe that the vast majority of people that we encounter have redeeming qualities and can turn themselves around, there is a small percentage of people out there who have no issue whatsoever with taking any life that they come across. And so those are the folks that we should concentrate on, and when the criteria fits, those are the people that should be incarcerated. And we should not just randomly incarcerate people because of an inability to raise a nominal fee. And so that's pretty straightforward for me, but just recognizing that effort, from others is something that I think is important.
While I think you got the silver medal from the councilman, would you like to take a moment and describe the 22nd District Discretionary Initiative?
So, police-assisted diversion is something we're working on. Particularly, it deals with low-level offenses, even low-level offenses related to possession of narcotics, illegal narcotics. And basically, there are officers that we have trained. I think it's upwards of about 26 to 28 now who have volunteered to participate. And they actively look for people who need help and people who want to particularly get out of addiction, what they're dealing with. And I think it's a progressive mindset that, again, people don't typically associate with us. But the encouraging thing is the number of police officers who are willing and who aren't strong-armed to participate. And so it changes a lot of that narrative, about what policing is and who the men and women are that make up this department. So, we're really encouraged by that. We've been involved in diversion in a number of ways in the schools for the last couple of years. We've been able to divert a number of school-age kids for minor offenses and in the hundreds and hundreds every year. Of the same mindset that we don't think it serves any purpose for a young kid who has either a small amount of marijuana or, scissors in their bag to send them down that path. And so we're very encouraged by that, and we'll continue to do things like that.
One of the themes that has come out in our conversations over the past day and a half is as a way of reinforcing a productive culture is to, Kim Fox, the state's attorney in Chicago, talked about reminding her assistant state's attorneys of the oath they took and returning to those core principles so that the line state's attorney, because she has 800 attorneys in her office and there's no way for her to speak individually to them, so how to get them to buy in. So as you said, they're not strong-armed into a policy that they're kind of begrudgingly following, but they're actually following their own innate desire to protect and serve and be the police officers that they wanted to be when they took the oath. So Judge.
Yes, we should have maybe compared what we were going to say before we said it, because I picked that diversion program as well. The thing about a police diversion program, it's almost an oxymoron. And the thing that I liked about it, in addition to all the things the commissioner has talked about and the councilman has talked about, was the fact that it is the officers on the street who are picking out the candidates for this program. So it means that we have police officers who are being trained to see people who they would ordinarily see as perps or criminals as people who need help. And I thought that that was a really wonderful part of the program, because if we can change our police force into a force of people who see people who need help, who have been lacking in their life in many of the things that those of us who are law-abiding have, and who need help rather than punishment, I think that we will have changed the culture a lot. And so I was going to compliment the commissioner on the police-assisted diversion, and I think it's really significant that this is called police-assisted diversion, even though it is a program that was a result of cooperation and a memorandum of understanding signed by not just the police, but the Defender Association, the District Attorney's Office, and the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services of the state of Pennsylvania. So that I think that programs like this, and hopefully in the future this program will be extended to be in other districts and cover other types of offenses. Right now it covers drug addiction and prostitution. And hopefully it will be expanded to cover other things and be throughout the city. And I think that will be a big step in the right direction. And if I may, since you mentioned the oath and Kim's reference to the oath, Nancy Winkleman, who is the head of our law division, brought another important statement to my attention that is apparently inscribed in a building of the Department of Justice of the United States. It's a statement that was made by a former United States Solicitor General named Frederick Lehman, who, having lost a big case, said, "When justice is done, the people win." And I think that's the attitude that we want to inculcate in all the attorneys on our staff, that they're there to see that justice is done, not like in the old days to win the case and get the longest sentence. And I think that will go a long way to changing the culture, even though we still face the great challenge of taking a large staff of 300 attorneys, not as large as Chicago, but pretty large, and getting them all to envision the same future.
Thank you. So for those of you who may be writing down questions, my colleague Ross Miller is in the back and he'll be sort of walking around. So if you have a question, just hold up your card and we'll come get it. In the meantime, Judge, why don't we start with you and work our way back to ensure that, you don't get your thunder stolen a second time. And I guess the question that I would ask each of you now is, you've had a chance to congratulate each other. Now the question I would ask you is, what is a specific innovation that you would like to see implemented in the city, and how would you work with the other people at the table to get that done?
Are you starting with me?
I am. Okay.
The thing I would like to see change is the public perception of what is the role of the prosecutor and what constitutes justice in the justice system. Unfortunately, now, we see from the pushback that Larry is getting when he announces his policies that there is still a very large section of the public in Philadelphia that thinks that what he's doing is wrong, that it's going to create a city full of criminals getting away with crimes, that it will decrease public safety in Philadelphia. and that it won't satisfy the needs of victims of crime, and especially families of homicide victims. I would like to be able in the future, that we have a lot of supporters too. I mean, I spoke together with my friend Nancy, I spoke at a continuing education course at Temple University on Tuesday, and we had almost 200 people in the audience, and I was expecting some hostile questions because it was mostly Q&A, and we didn't get that. So there are a lot of people in the city who are supporting what we're doing, what we're trying to do in the DA's office. But I would like to see the public perception of the role of the prosecutor change, and I think that's going to take time, and I'm hoping it will happen, and I'm hoping that this new wave that seems to be coming, even though it's only in a relatively few places in the country, and even though at present it's relying perhaps on the support of wealthy individuals and of institutions like this we have here. But I think that the public's expectation of the justice system has been colored over, well, in my lifetime, since the 80s. In the 70s, we had a gentler culture. We were talking about rehabilitation. We had LEAA, which was giving money to almost anybody who could come up with an idea for doing something in the criminal justice system, including a lot of very creative programs within the prisons themselves. Back in the 70s, I was chief counsel and secretary of the state parole board for a while. And during that time, a life sentence meant somewhere between 13 to 18 years. It was understood that if you got a life sentence, you could apply for a pardon and then ultimately parole after 13 to 18 years. Over the last many years, since the mid-'80s, when we went from a rehabilitative idea to a punitive idea of what the justice system ought to be, life without parole meant life without parole. And I think we have about 300 people, I may have my figures wrong, from Philadelphia alone, serving life without parole in the prison system. I have gotten correspondence from prisoners who call themselves rehabilitated elderly lifers. And I think we should hear from them. All they want is a chance to go before a parole board and say, maybe we should get out, because just like we can't treat juveniles the same as we treat adults who commit homicide, maybe elderly lifers have also minds that have changed and grown, and maybe they should have a chance to at least have somebody say whether they might have a chance to get out or not. After all, we have to remember that a minimum sentence doesn't mean you get out. It just means you get a chance to go in front of the parole board. So that's my hope. My hope is that the public perception of the justice system and what it should accomplish will change.
Thank you. Yeah, yesterday, Penn political science professor Marie Gottschalk was on a panel, and she described the elderly rehabilitation condition that you're describing as criminal menopause. Just something to think about. Commissioner?
So we all know that misidentification is a major issue in criminal justice cases. And so most probably have heard that we have gone to sequential blind photo arrays to essentially stave off those horrible things that happen with misidentification. And so and yes, you're right, John, and his friend came back. That was not an easy sell. Because there's essentially a hierarchy within policing. There are the difficulties that are inherent with selling police officers, line officers. But then when you take that the next level to detectives, it's a whole nother ballgame. because detectives in Philly PD, they're great, but they truly do believe that you get a 10% IQ bump when you make detective. And so they think that everybody else is just, coming along for the ride.
I thought that was the detective test.
Yeah, yeah, that's, but they really kind of believe it. So trying to get that sold was an issue, but we've done that. We've been able to get there, and we believe that's been successful. But we're looking to take that to the next level with actual in-person lineups and doing that blind kind of lined up, sequentially done as well, to see if we can have the same impact. We're looking to move into that. And so that's one of the things that I want to see happen, because clearly it's nothing more egregious that can happen, and nothing that impacts, the credibility of the criminal justice system than when you send someone to prison and it's the wrong person. And so this is something we have to work on, and so we just believe there's one more thing that's going to help us out.
Well, I actually will commend all three of your organizations for working with us to do root cause analyses of cases of error, and in particular, we are preparing recommendations to send to each of your offices on an eyewitness case that did result in an inaccurate conviction. And the fact that each of your offices has been willing to engage in that open process to figure out how we can prevent that going forward is, I think, an example really that we're now working to implement in other jurisdictions with the help of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, who I know is here today. So, and just to highlight the future, we had a panel on interrogation training, interrogation techniques, because one of the things that I think happens in criminal justice reform, I said this to the audience yesterday, is that we often come to you and say what you're not doing well, but we don't give you an alternative to help actually do things and be accurate and be more accurate. We can say be less inaccurate,
right,
but we don't always come to you and say here's how you can be more accurate. And some of the stuff that's going on in the science of questioning to gather more information is something we'll be wanting to come back and talk to you more about. So there's always room for more improvement, but we appreciate what you talked about here. Councilman?
I always love forums where I actually learn something. It's refreshing, and I appreciate being invited today. I would have to go with day reporting centers. And I would do that. We had a trip up to State Road in the prison, and we had about a dozen inmates in front of us. One of our kinder, gentler, liberal folk that were on our panel posed the question, should anyone ever be incarcerated? I think, and I'm quoting, everyone should be let go. So we both stopped.
That wasn't me.
It wasn't me. It was not. It was not. But it was somebody. So I looked and I said, I don't know what neighborhood you grew up in, but as a kid, I grew up in a fairly tough neighborhood. There were a couple of guys that I grew up with. When they went to jail, and they did, it was a neighborhood holiday because everybody took a collective sigh of relief, and you grew up in neighborhoods like that too. And so we imposed the question, do you believe what he said, not what he said, but what the individuals said, that no one belonged in jail? And they looked around at each other and they said, there's some people that need to be up here. And making that distinction, I think it might have been a third of them really needed to be protected, sometimes even from themselves, that maybe putting them in jail would save their actual life. But there's a great number that shouldn't be there. And the consequences of what happens when you lose your job after you go up there, you lose your rent, you lose your home, you can lose your family because you're not providing like you should or even there as you should be. Those consequences go far beyond sometimes the crime that they're there for. And those consequences are longer lasting than the 6 months you might spend in jail. So what we believe, if you ever went to Red Hook, New York, or Google it when you have an opportunity, they have a community court concept where they look holistically at why are you doing this? And what are the contributing factors that make you a car thief or whatever it is? And so they design in the sentencing remediation that you're going to go, I use the analogy, Eagles game, two guys got in a fight at the bar because one was a New England fan. Now they're friends, but when they consume alcohol, they are different people. and some of them have a record that preceded that incident. And so one hits the other and winds up in jail because of their record and their score, and they could spend time there. But they're losing their job, they're losing their house, they're losing different things. In Washington, there is no bail. You are either a danger to yourself and society, and you should stay, or they release you with conditions. Like you can't go to the bar anymore. And you might need to take a 12-step program before you get to the judge. And a graduated level of supervision might be the concept of day reporting. And that day might be that you come at 7 a.m. and you get a coffee and a donut, and then you pay some of your debt to society, which might be clean a vacant lot or remove some graffiti. But at 12 noon, you get soup and a sandwich, and we begin to work on you. So maybe you were sentenced or recommended to get an anger management program or job training or finish that GED that you quit on to make yourself a better human being by the time you see that judge. And if it's a graduated sense of supervision, you are a car thief or you are a hustler of some type, there's an ankle bracelet on you so that at 7 p.m. you need to be in the house. And so it is supervised, it is controlled, but it isn't to the extreme of incarceration. And so to that level of discretion, the judge can say and look at the risk assessment and look at the individual to determine a bad person from a person having a bad Super Bowl day. And those are big distinctions. And when you wind up on State Road, you're thrown in with everybody. And that's gladiator school. and things happen. People change in that process. If we can keep them closer to their neighborhood and their careers and keep them on a positive path, it is better for my conservative member that just wants to save money because that process costs less. You go up, we went up to Luzerne County, and the people were thanking those in charge for the attention given to them to deal with their human concerns. It was amazing to me. So it's a different approach and one that I think is on Sam Williams sitting over there, former assistant DA, is working on a RFP to look at that concept and how it should be for Philadelphia, whether it should be pre-trial or post. We debate those things. You saw our face. But it is a concept that continue the process of reducing the census on State Road. We've achieved about a 30% reduction in individuals incarcerated. And the sky didn't fall, I don't think. Crime didn't go up. There wasn't murder, mayhem. And we're saving money. And we hope to do that to close a prison someday.
So this is the worst part about going last, right? So I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of what the councilman did say. What he just described there is what we call pre-entry, a shift in focus on the front end of our system. And hopefully that will eventually lead to making better decisions of what to do with people when we recognize that they may have challenges that may lend itself to behaviors that we deem to be criminal right now. And so right now, our criminal justice system operates kind of like an emergency room. We wait until the last minute to provide people with much needed individual treatment that will hopefully help them not come back. But in that process, we may start to make people more desperate by the policies that we enforce. So for instance, using a cash bail system may keep someone in jail, like Commissioner Ross said, and like the Councilman Jones said, may keep someone in jail away from their families, away from their jobs, away from their benefits that keep them stabilized. When I say that, I mean Medicaid. There are a lot of people that are on Medicaid that have medication for anxiety, depression, whatever that is. When they sit in jail, they lose those things. And when they get transitioned back into the community, it takes a while, and that's for a well-adjusted person. Someone like myself who would be, pretty much understand what processes I need to do to go through to get my benefits back, it would take me about 6 to 8 months. Think about someone who's going through a lot of other issues besides whether or not they need to get their benefits turned on. They're thinking about, where am I going to live? Where am I going to eat? Where are my kids? That can be a much longer process. And so sometimes we make people much more desperate when they return to their community, which may likely give their return back to the criminal justice system. So what pre-entry is a focus on the front end, a shift in a mindset that goes alongside with the bail reform movement. And that is understanding that there are community supports that the city already pays for that are not being utilized as well as they can be, and that we can get those people who we make determinations that you can be released, starting to focus on their challenges that brought them in here as part of an analysis of looking at looking at the case through the eyes of a new reformed DA and saying, hey, do we need to straddle this person with a lifetime criminal conviction? Or did we just really finally recognize what brought them here in the first place? And now that they're getting community supports, we can kind of status keep an eye on it and figure out whether or not we want to label this person a criminal. I think that our system has there is a real need for our prisons for some people, right? But I think we have gotten, and I'll say we as a society, lazy in being creative as possible and saying, what can we do for those people, like you said, that just have a bad day or have real social needs that need to be addressed because they're not criminal behaviors, they are acting this way because of real mental health issues or real extreme poverty issues. We are not going to incarcerate those things away. So the way we use our system to determine who should be in and who should be out has a real cost on our society and, of course, our taxpayer dollars that can be used in so many more beneficial ways. So I would hope that we have a bail reform system that recognizes that people can be released and life disruptions can be limited, and one that uses a holistic approach that encompasses day reporting centers to address needs that can be recognized by the decision makers as not a criminal justice related type of activity, but a social need that we can address in different ways.
So a question that we've gotten from the audience that I'll just put out to all of you. Each of your constituencies plays a role in responding to the aftermath of an officer-involved shooting. While these incidents generate considerable public controversy, one thing pretty much everyone can agree on is we'd like to have fewer such incidents. It's worth pausing to mention that in the last panel, Craig Futterman from the University of Chicago talked about two very different officer-involved shootings. One that we've all seen on video, the Laquan McDonald shooting, in which it was ruled that the officer was not justified, but another one happening on campus, which he said may very well become a justified shooting. In other words, a shooting in which the officer legitimately had fear for his or her physical safety, and that both of those things are under the umbrella of officer-involved shootings. What should the city be doing beyond what we're doing today to minimize the number of officer-involved shootings?
So, I mean, I guess I'd be crazy to duck this question, right? So,
We all looked at you.
yeah, I saw it. So first, I think it's important to underscore what some of the numbers are and what we've done thus far. And so many of you know that in 2012, my friend, mentor, and predecessor, Chuck Ramsey, was concerned about the number of police-involved shootings we had that year. It was 98 in total. Now, just to qualify that, not all 98 were at individuals. I mean, we classify any police shooting, we count them as an accidental discharge any place other than the range, at a dog, and so forth and so on. But there were a number that were at actual, what we call offenders or individuals. Pretty high number, and that's why we pulled in the federal government for collaborative reform. Not a consent decree, collaborative reform, which involved it was a significant undertaking, 91 recommendations, a third of which were done and completed when Chuck Ramsey left, and we pretty much completed 2/3 of it upon his departure, and that was according to the Obama administration, not the present one. And so from that time, from 2012 up until 2017, we went from 98 police-involved shootings to 33. Significant drop. Of those 33, 11 were actually at offenders. many of whom who did have a weapon. I think already you've seen a significant decline. In fact, I had a national publication reach out to me at the very end of last year, and they were saying that of the large departments in the country, we had seen the largest drop in the last 5 years. And so in answer to what can we do more, I think the collaborative reform would be one thing. Policy changes that were designed to strengthen our use of force policy would be the other. But the other one is turning out, in my estimation, to be the biggest one by and far. It's something that was born out of the whole process, but it's reality-based training that we have enhanced significantly and doubled down on in the last year or so, where we had run that on one shift. We send through not only police recruits, but veteran officers. They all enjoy it. They get a lot from it. We even will send, lay folks through so that they can get some perspective on what's going on. We just sent our police chaplains through, and like most folks, they shot the room up and either got killed 3 and 4 different times, or they actually shot a bunch of people in the back.
You know.
Yeah, so, and it is really, it's really an eye-opener, and I wish more people would avail themselves of that, because even people who have gone through it, who know that this is nothing but a mock exercise, they will tell you, heart's still racing, and that they're still scared to death as they're going through it, because once you get in it, you get in it. And so we believe that has yielded significant results for us. We continue to do that. In addition to which, we do something else to reinforce that, and that is all day long on the police radio, whether I'm going home or coming back, you hear, and they're not subliminal messages, they're right to the point. Slow down, take your time, evaluate your situation, take cover. So all these things are constantly reinforcing what we're teaching in reality-based training, but just making it clear that it's okay, take cover. You don't have to rush in, even protect yourself. All these things that work in tandem with one another. In addition to which, and it may not sound like it's directly correlated, but we also, in beginning of last year, we changed the way we investigate police-involved shootings. And so in my entire 29 years on this job, up until last year, what would happen is you'd get a officer-involved shooting, and the only thing you could get in the form of a statement from the police officer before being cleared by the DA's office was a summary via the responding supervisor, meaning that you didn't even get that directly from the officer because they have their rights, right? And so in addition to giving that officer and the system a chance to find out within 3 days, because what we did is we bifurcated the entire process. So it's not to violate their rights, and so that they could give a statement without fear of it being used against them criminally, we're able to expedite that process, understand better from the beginning exactly what happened, because the minute I tell him what happened is subject to his interpretation of what he thought I said. And that as a police commissioner, I'm reacting under the old way of what he thought he heard the officer say in summary. And now I'm not even giving that officer a chance, number one, nor am I giving that family an opportunity to say, this is what we know happened, as opposed to this is what we surmise happened. And so in those unfortunate incidents, and I've had to do so in at least 1 or 2, where we have actually discharged an officer or terminated an officer prior to them ever being arrested or anything, before, it's not that you couldn't do it, but you kind of felt like you were putting everybody in an unfair predicament by virtue of acting on something without getting all the information. So I think we've already made significant strides. You can always go a lot further, but if you just look at those numbers within 5 years, that's pretty significant.
So I had, from a different lens, was appointed to review how the city was complying with those recommendations. What was amazing to me was that, first of all, they volunteered to be audited. That's the first thing that strikes you. And by the time we started reviewing the recommendations, they didn't wait for the recommendations. They had already started implementing the changes in training and things like that. What I think the commissioner did not say, which I will say for him, is that we trust him. We trust that he is a straight shooter. I've called him on a number of issues. I don't get the answer I may want, I get a truthful answer. And that's all you can ask for. So when these kinds of shootings, and that will happen, and he goes in the room and he reviews the process under full examination of other people as well, we actually trust that he's going to come out and tell us the truth. The difference between that and other scenarios is Ferguson, is Baltimore, and it is not Philly. And so I'm in a different side of the house, and we, elected officials, we every now and then we're grandstand about things, but there is a degree of confidence that comes with a person that has integrity, and that you can't buy it. And I'm saying that in front of, I hope you ain't blushing, but it's true.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, I don't have any comments per se, but I do have a question. If I may. Sure. It was really refreshing to hear what you talked about in terms of your process to eliminate these unnecessary shootings. I think, though, there's one element that, of course, I would be bringing up, and I would ask, what do you do in terms of the racial bias and how that could play into someone's fear of whether or not an individual is dangerous or not? I know there were some police departments that when they were training with imagery, they switched the races. Mm-hmm. So some police departments always had an African-American male in a hoodie or whatever, and that was how they trained. And now they put, a Caucasian male. And so they tried to switch the races and see if the response was the same. Do you address that particular piece at all in your training to eliminate these types of events?
So we do two things, and I'm not going to suggest that they're totally without flaws, but one of which has to do with implicit bias training that we get with a lady by the name of Dr. Lori Friedel. She comes in and she trains particularly commanders, and we go through things just like what you're talking about, and it is truly enlightening for a lot of folks and how they react to different photos that'll come up and how suggestive they can be, and not realizing where you are on that spectrum. I will tell you that the one thing that I am concerned about with the training, and this is on us and not on her, the process is one of train the trainers, because we're such a large organization. And my concern, as I've said to my staff, is now as you rely on someone else who is not trained in that field to push down this whole concept, this mindset, you now become subjected to whatever their biases are that they don't even know, or not even aware they may have. And so I'm not quite certain that we figured out how to push it down below the command ranks where we probably need it most. But there are instances where I can tell you in our reality-based training where that race issue is, we sneak it into it and you don't even realize it's happening. Where maybe you got an African-American police trainer that flops with someone, and that's just subtle. And so were you quicker to respond to that person who pulled out the cell phone than maybe you would not have? It's just little things, and please, we don't televise this because it would mess up the training. But sometimes it's the little things that you try to do. But as I said, being very forthright, trying to figure out a way, you hear people talk about implicit bias training all the time. Trying to figure out a way to incorporate that, particularly in large organizations, has been challenging, but it's something we know we have to work on.
So I know I'm at Penn, but I'm about to use broken English. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean ain't nobody following you. And I say that the loose interpretation is that there are stereotypical scenarios. I am judged differently when I wear this suit than when I wear my sweatsuit. I've gotten on elevators coming into City Hall, and individuals when I'm in the sweatsuit, take a step back and clutch their bag. That happens. One of my staff, I had an instance when she was in law school where she was on her way, and 3 young men pulled up a hoodie and started walking faster, and she ran like hell. Now, whether she was right or wrong, we're not able to tell whether that was a good decision or a bad decision, but it was a natural decision. And so we have to be careful with that. The originator of what's the doctor from Penn that does the risk assessment? Burke. He testified before City Council on risk assessment and how to deal with those implicit biases. He is the bravest individual I've ever met in my life because he told the truth. He said, now, these are the statistics, math doesn't lie. Here's where it comes from here. But every time you take it out because it seems biased, you're going to take away from the accuracy of the predictability. Now, I remember you going back and forth with him. It was a wonderful debate. You should have seen it. But I couldn't help but say, and look at some of how he came to his conclusions. And so I don't know how we deal with that as a whole. And I just hope that there is, no matter what the race, one set of rules. One set of rules of how you deal with people. And if you do that, that will in some ways take care of itself. I always talk about justice by zip code. Can't have one set of rules for Chestnut Hill and one set of rules for Southwest Philadelphia. You have to have one set of rules. And that's where I'm at on that.
So 3 quick points, and I'll get to another question from the audience. First, I would leave here right now and go do that real-time training, so you let me know, and I'm in.
Me too.
All right.
Second, another thing that my understanding is the department does is it actually has an award that it gives to officers for de-escalation.
We do.
Which I think is a notable thing and something that isn't in place in a lot of other jurisdictions, and you can obviously see how that would have value if an officer de-escalates a situation instead of escalates it and then gets a department-wide accolade. That's obviously, I think, something that
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that, when we started that, recognizing that there are men and women that perform brave acts that don't involve a discharge of a firearm or something like that, and we were overlooking that. And initially, I think it was only us and LAPD that were as large departments, and it was being mocked in large part by a lot of folks, especially some fraternal
probably
organizations.
people at Harvard.
Yeah, but it's interesting, and I'll tell you a very quick story before you go on. When we first started it, I had a gentleman a police officer, he grabbed me by the Mac machine downstairs and he says, he said, Commissioner, I got to be honest with you. When you first came up with this, I was like, what is this crap? Why are we doing this? And he said, it's interesting. Now, he happens to work in a place called Research and Planning that actually writes up all the awards. And so he's writing up all the awards. He said, do you realize that we just got 40 awards for de-escalation? So it shows you that people understand the benefit of it, and it's not just about you doing something that was traditionally viewed as brave or something that was viewed as valor. And when you start to change that mindset, that paradigm, you slowly start to move the needle just a little bit at a time, and I think that's what's important. So thank you for bringing that up.
And the third point that I would make actually comes from an article from USA Today from this morning, actually timely news. The stat is a police stat, but I think the conclusion is actually true of defenders and prosecutors as well. So the stat was that 46 police officers died in the line of duty this year from gunshots, but that 140 police officers committed suicide this year.
Right.
And so I think one of the things to keep in mind as we are looking for ways to reduce tension, reduce escalation, reduce violence in the system is that the people who work in our criminal justice system often are suffering themselves. And when those people suffer, the conclusions they jump to sometimes are not as rational, not as calm, not as slowed down as we would like them to be. And so efforts that work on resilience and well-being and improving the emotional health of the people who work in the system. And I think this is, like I said, I think this is true of defenders. I think this is true of ADAs. The workloads, the pressures, the stakes are very high. People's lives are at risk. And I think expanding our focus to care for our own employees, I think is something to consider as well. Another question from the audience, again, for all of you. We've heard a lot over the past 2 days about reforming the way insiders administer justice. What should the role of the community be in the adjudication as opposed to the administration of justice? And so, I'm just going to put a little addendum on the question, which is to say, we have juries, but in a jurisdiction where 95% of our cases are pled, we don't have that role either. So what should the role of the community be in decisions about how we adjudicate justice?
Your Honor?
Well, yeah, okay. I think the community has a large role to play because those of us who are in the justice system have to listen to the community and know what the pulse of the community is. To the extent that we want to impose our ideas on the community, we really have to understand where the community is, how the community thinks, and how best to communicate with the community. And I think that's something that we are continually learning, that we have to be more open. I think that we have to, I know that in Chicago, Kim has a webpage. It's really wonderful to go to that webpage. And she talked a little bit about it yesterday with all the information about what her office has done this year, for 2017 compared to 2016. All these statistics are there for every kind of case and every result, whether they won it or lost it or what the sentence was or not guilty, whatever it was, it's all there. Anybody who wants any information about what her office is doing and has done can find it on that webpage. And I think we need to do that too. Our office plans to do that. I believe we want to be more open. We want to share what we know and what we're thinking with the public. And I think that hasn't been done in the past. It's been like this was a secret society and we didn't talk about how we made our decisions. We didn't lay ourselves open to criticism, and I think we aren't afraid to do that now. Our office wants to hear from the public. We want to hear the public reaction. We hope that we'll be able to educate the public to agree with us where we think that we feel very strongly about something like bail reform and lowering the overcrowding in the prisons and having more reasonable sentences and having more reasonable conditions on probation and parole and shorter terms of probation and parole. We hope we'll be able to convince the public that we're not making the streets unsafe by these policies and that we'll have their support. But we also have to understand where the public is coming from, and we have to hear their concerns, and we can't brush them aside, and they have to know what we're doing. And I think that we, Mr. Krasner and the policies that he's initiating and plans to initiate, together with, working together with the people who are here up on the platform with me. And I think that there is a growing sense of community in the justice system in Philadelphia. I think we're working together much more than before. We're cooperating on things where we can, and we're sharing criticisms where we have them as well. So I think all of that is going to help our relationship with the city.
John, if I may, I like that question because one of the things that we are saying at the Defender Association is that reform takes all of us, and that doesn't just mean the players in the system, but it also means the community. So one of the things that we are doing is we are going around with an initiative called participatory defense. And participatory defense means you have to participate in your own defense. Community members, family members, persons charged participate in meaningful ways. Through that initiative, we go around and we do know your systems training, not know your rights training, but know your systems training. Because what we realized that people were uninformed about the process, so they didn't make the best decisions as to how to get the best results. As we go through and really map out our systems process, and we set up community hubs to train and empower their own people in their community on what steps do you have to take to get the results that you say you deserve. So we put a case map up of say a felony case. Most people don't know a felony case has, if everything goes right, about 8 different hearings that you have to go through. Each one of those hearings are designed to do different things. And I've seen a lot of people come to a preliminary hearing, be held for court and believe that they were found guilty, and then flee because they thought they were going to get 5 years in jail. And they didn't realize that if they had just stayed put, what had happened in that hearing was a real viable defense strategy that could have resulted in a very good result for them. Instead, they would flee, and then once they get picked up on a bench warrant, we know what happens. So it's just kind of designed to engage community in a way to say we all have to own this reform effort, and what we need for you to pay it forward is to understand how to navigate the system. So if we want meaningful bail reform, if we want people to be released, then we need to train you on what they need to do to abide by conditions, abide by things that we would need for them to abide by to advance the goals of what bail had once been in place for, but also to understand the information that you need to gather so that the public defender or someone who has a lot of work that doesn't really know this person as well as the community does, and doesn't really know the result that you would want as a community, bring that to the purview of the advocate so that a decision maker, whether it be a DA at the very beginning deciding what to charge or what not to charge with, or whether it be a judge deciding whether to release someone, can make the best informed decisions, not just on the facts of the case, but on the individual. So we're really asking community to step up in ways that they want something, be the change you want to see.
Three quick points. One, I love the youth court concept in our public schools where there are adjudicated suspensions, disciplinary actions, actually in a mock trial way, where they have a defender, where they have a judge, where they have a jury, and you threw a chair in class, and why, and what should be your punishment. And you have these young people from 9th grade to seniors playing each role. First you start as a juror, then you start as a defender, then you start as a judge, and they get the sense of the basics of it. Because what you have at a very young level, which attributes to a bigger problem, is a no-snitch culture. And I'm not getting involved in this criminal justice system when, in fact, you are involved. And so you should take responsibility for it. So that's number one. The second thing is PSA districts that you have, I think is one of the best things the police department ever did. So you have these strategic areas where crimes and responses to crimes are mapped out. And you bring the public in and you find out, well, car robberies went up 10%, and oh, by the way, we're going to increase patrols. They get a sense of how they're being serviced and even protected. And finally, I just think we have to be more jurist. You can't duck being a jury. On a jury, you should participate. And you shouldn't have professional jurists that just keep coming because it's like a soap opera. You should have regular citizens from different walks of life coming in. That's your duty as a citizen, in my opinion.
All right. We had a panel yesterday, this is mostly for the chief defender. We had a panel yesterday where we talked about holistic defense and other structures for criminal defense. So one of the questions coming from the audience is holistic defense being practiced in Philadelphia? Does the office have the resources? What are its advantages or challenges?
So I can say, informally, we do some holistic defense practices. Formally, we have not been able to set up a structure that can really support a holistic defense organization. That would look like combining CLS and the Defender Association together. That would be a holistic defense type of practice. So we don't really have those resources. The Bronx Defender does. They use, if you need housing, if you need anyone to help you getting your parental rights not to be terminated, all of those are part of the representation model. We are focusing on trying to be more client-centered, which will bring about holistic types of opportunities. And client-centered means really understanding the human before you and what the cost or toll or reasons why the person entered this system before. I can tell you in the era that I practice, we were, I would say, a lawyer-centered system where we looked at the facts, we looked at the constitutional issues, we looked at the trial issues, and that's how we tried the case. Now we are using social service advocates in a much more meaningful way on the front end to provide what we call mitigations or understanding of the person. That helps us at advocacy at every step of the way, make better decisions, make better arguments for better results or more just results. And we're using, just like I said, different creative approaches. We're using community to bring forth information that would be really helpful. We're using community to somewhat come up with solutions to their own problems, and that we can bring to a DA and say, hey, this community wants to take, or this church wants to take this kid into this program. I know he did this, but this church has a better idea of how to handle that situation. And, we put that together. We use videos, social biography videos, to not only explain who the person is, but show that person in a light that would be very distant to someone trying to decide who that person is and what to do with them. And so we actually teamed up with UPenn to do that, and we've been able to give social biography videos to the district attorney, where they actually see, do I really want to prosecute this person once I now see their life, their opportunities, who their support structures are? And they have actually dismissed cases from the arrest stage, before the prelim stage, because we're looking at that client-centered, but not quite holistic approach. So that's an answer that someone can live with. We are moving, we're trying to figure it out, but we're trying to work with CLS a little bit more to figure out ways that we can intersect.
Well, it seems like one of the challenges, and I think this seems to be true, I kind of hear these themes in a lot of the different challenges that we have, is we have challenges of time, how much time can we spend to learn about an individual in the system, and we have challenges of how much information can we gather about that person so that we can use it in the limited time that we have. And I would imagine one of the challenges in what you're describing is the number of different agencies around the city that have slivers of information about somebody, but not being able to centralize it, and then not having the time to reflect upon it to come up with a thoughtful solution.
You know what, and that was really a big factor, but family members have a lot more information than some of the other systems that don't even talk to each other, and by engaging them in those ways, the grandmother brings papers on her grandson from years, about schooling and IEPs and, whatever it is. It just took a little bit of patience and time to really talk to people and explain to them why that was important. And so we're getting a lot more information than we used to. We hope to, even enhance that opportunity. But when you engage people in a meaningful way and inform them, they bring all that paperwork they may have laying in the bottom shelf or somewhere that can help you piece together some more.
So next question is, if diversion is an appropriate and productive alternative to criminal prosecution for things like drug use and prostitution, then why are we still bringing those subjects under the criminal law in the first place? Shouldn't it be social workers, doctors, and hospitals that handle health and welfare issues, not police and courts? And I guess, Councilman, if you don't mind, maybe I'll put you on the spot for this one as the legislator on the panel.
Well, and I'm not in law enforcement, I'm just a lawmaker, but usually it goes with, it's not just the use of the drug, it's the use of a drug in the commission of a crime. So they go together like peanut butter and jelly, and so detangling them is a part of the process. The mayor, and I co-signed on that bill to decriminalize marijuana. Well, that's so that that kid having a bad day doesn't have a altered trajectory in life. Get it? But if you're smoking that marijuana stick, driving down the street, and you hit somebody, that's a whole different analysis of what's going on. So I am uncomfortable, and I voted for it. I'm uncomfortable with some of the signals it sends as well. I walk my dog is named Captain Jack Jones, and he is a American Staffordshire Terrier, which is a bougie pit bull. And so we're walking along, and we're on our way past SLA, and there were a group of kids standing on the corner, and they were beginning to partake in some marijuana. And first thing I stopped, I looked at him, I said, "Aren't you getting ready to go to school?" He said, yeah, but it's not criminal anymore. And so, like, nah. And so I am uncomfortable totally dismissing all of that and because sometimes it's a gateway to other things. And that's where I'm at as a lawmaker.
So we have time for one more question, but while I have the microphone and you guys can focus on me, I want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here, but I especially want to thank all of the people that helped this event to happen. So any of you who were a speaker, you dealt with Anna Gavin, who's in the back here. Any of you who sat in anything or is enjoying this, you're doing so because Anna rocks. Yes. So I want to thank you, Anna. But it's important to note that Anna actually doesn't work alone, and she has an incredible team of faculty support and the IT people that put this together, the people who are doing the videos, the people who do the CLE, so that those of you who are lawyers can continue to practice. You know, it's a probably 25 to 30 people work together to put this event on and help, you know, show Penn in its best light. So I'm indebted to them. And obviously, you can't have a good party without good guests. So I want to thank all of you for coming. The last question goes to Judge Temin, not in your capacity as first assistant, but knowing what you know about the judiciary role, because the question is, there seems to be incredible ignorance or apathy, and I guess one of the sub-questions is, which one do you think it is, when it comes to judicial elections on the part of the public? How can we better educate or invest the public on the importance of these votes?
That's a really hard one to answer in Philadelphia, because no matter what we've done, I think the League of Women Voters tries. They tried to do voter education. They publish articles about the judges. You know, we elect judges, and therefore we have sort of a dual system where we want meritorious judges. You know, we want good judges. At the same time, elections don't always produce the best judges. And I think people have in Philadelphia just accept that. And they aren't thinking about how we can do better at picking judges. And I really think that the Bar Association, you know, the Bar Association has a whole process for vetting judicial candidates, for examining them and then rating them. But nobody pays attention to the Bar Association ratings, and politically they're meaningless. You know, we've elected a number of judges who've been found unqualified by the Bar Association because politically it doesn't mean anything. I think if the people who, you know, the important people who run our political elections are actually the local politicians, the ward leaders and the committee people. Those are the people who know who the judges, who the people are who are running for judge. The general public generally doesn't know anything about any of the judges and doesn't go out of its way to learn anything about the judges. I think one way that would help would be if the TV stations would give free time to political candidates so that they would have to go on TV and talk to the public and maybe be questioned by the public, televise a program where the candidates are questioned by panels of citizens and also academics and lawyers, a variety of people to test their knowledge. As it is, in order to run for judge in Philadelphia, there really, other than that you're a member of the bar, there are no real qualifications. And it's really up to the public to demand better judges, I think, and I hope they will. We want to have a good bench, and because of the apathy, there seems to be no interest in finding out about the judges, and I think we have to maybe make it more possible for judges to get publicity and to talk to the public. The judges are always at the bottom of the list of candidates, and they get very little airtime. They get very little, I mean, some judges have enough money to go on television, but their ads don't say very much. You know, when you see a judge in the past, all they said was, I'm going to be tough but fair. That got you elected. But really what got you elected was the grassroots. In Philadelphia politics, if you want to be elected as a judge, and it was this way when I ran, which was more than 30 years ago, and I think it's still the same, you have to be supported by the grassroots politicians, by the committee people and the ward leaders, and they're the ones who really select the judges. And I think they're the people that we have to convince to support qualified judges, and I'm hoping that that will happen. I'm not sure what the exact process for making that happen would be, but maybe it starts at the top, Councilman, with people like you, making sure that that other people lower down in the political sphere also want really qualified judges.
So everything she said was absolutely accurate. And in fact, she was polite in saying it. The process you have to go through to be a judge in the city of Philadelphia is horrible. You have to walk down the road and you get robbed by consultants, and I don't understand how some of the political consultants do what they do to future judges who are going to be on a bench for 10 years. Like, it's amazing to me. In political forums, after the council people speak, we might get 5 minutes. You get 30 seconds to say who you are and what you're going to do. And literally, that is so unfair. And so I think it's changing. Some of you, I want you to Google the name Meek Mills and what's going on with that. The mayor went to visit this individual in prison yesterday based on what happened in an interaction with a judge. So at the grassroots level, people are becoming more aware of the role of a judge. But this is my third term, so I've seen elections when judges are, it's not the way it should be.
They are looking at retention now, based on the Meek Mills case, and you can see a more concerted effort to be organized. I think in the paper, they were looking at a judge's stats and history of sentencing, and they were putting that information in the paper for juvenile judges. Those were out there now, and those were a direct result of people understanding how they can impact a judge's election on retention. So now that they have a history of this judge's, the way they rule.
So for a very different reason, the grassroots are looking at it. And
I would like to make one point, though, that I think is really important. A lot of people say that the elected system is wrong, that the problem with Philadelphia and other places that have elected judges have bad judges because they're elected. That's not true. Let me give as an example the federal system. Look at the federal system and how it works. It's just as political, if not more political, than the elected system. As long as judges who are appointed in an appointed system are appointed by the politicians, the appointed system won't be any better than the elected system. For a long time, we had a different system in Philadelphia and in the federal system in Philadelphia, and that was that the Republican and Democratic heads of the party got together and agreed on who they would support. And therefore, to be a judge, to be elected a judge, you had to have the support of both parties. And for a while, we got better judges that way. That system then disappeared. And by the same token, in the federal system, the senators, who are the ones who really get to pick the judges, just wouldn't support somebody who wasn't qualified. When Arlen Specter was our senior senator from Pennsylvania, he himself was a lawyer. He had been a lawyer from a big firm. He had been a district attorney. He knew what a qualified judge was, and he wouldn't support anyone for appointment who wasn't qualified. But you can just as well have a politician who will support people who are not well qualified for the federal bench. So I always want to make the point that it's not your process. It's really how you implement that process that produces good judges. And I agree with Keir that we have to look at, we shouldn't automatically retain everybody on the bench, which is what happened. To get retained in Pennsylvania, you just need to get more yes votes than no. So theoretically, you get 3 votes. If you get 2 yeses and 1 no, you'll be retained. And I think we should look more carefully at retention judges, but we should also educate the public better about what it means to be a judge. In fact, we should educate the public better about the whole court system. Justice O'Connor, after she left the bench, dedicated a lot of her time toward creating games for children to play that would teach them about the court system. And they were games where the children got to play being a juror, they got to play being a prosecutor, being a defense lawyer, being a judge, and that way they learned about the system. We really need to start teaching people at a very young age about the court system. It's the least understood branch of government.
So I think I've got 2 real-time trainings I have to attend now, one for the police and one for the courts. Thanks very much for your time. I think, Councilman, we couldn't have done this 5 years ago. Thank you very much. It's wonderful having you.
And it's great putting that here. I hope we'll be able to.
Thanks again for everybody who attended. Thanks for your time and the terrific questions and your participation. And we look forward to seeing you again next year, if not before. Thanks, guys.